goes, the ausbiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Well, hello, and welcome to this program. I'm Nadine Blaney.
Hi, and I'm Danny Akuye. And what a day, Nadine. We've got such a big week. So the market didn't do too badly, did it?
I suppose not. It was really mixed out there, sector-wise. Mildly positive, though. So up by about 0.25%, as you can see with the COB Australia index. The curtains have come down on that index, although we do have some of the last trades of the day going through the S&P ASX 200.
Absolutely, and that's currently up about 5 points. But let's check in with what some of the three themes are today. And I couldn't help myself with meeting mayhem. That's the question mark. Whether or not all these central bank meetings is going to create volatility in both the bond markets. And if there's bond market volatility, equities go too.
Absolutely.
And it's a suite, isn't it? RBA, FOMC,
BOJ, BOE. What don't we have?
Switzerland.
Okay, well, let's not forget that one. But we'll be very much focused on the RBA tomorrow. You had a couple of conversations today on expectations, BIS economics, Oxford BIS.
Oxford, it's Oxford economics. I did the same
all
thing.
right.
Showing our age.
They were putting out a few forecasts. That's up online if you'd like to have a listen. But avoiding recession, however, I don't think we're going to be hearing a particularly. Well, what do you say? Particularly dovish Fed or RBA tomorrow?
I don't know. I think they're just, well, personally, I think they're in a bit of a conundrum because I think there is real heartache out there in the economy, but immigration is still quite strong. Certainly, Sean Landcake very much saying they're going to be positioned at the hawkish end, and that is just to remind everybody, don't go out and start spending because we may hike again, even though that's more positioning rather than actually hiking rates. Although some analysts, some experts are saying you can't discount it. And I went, heaven forbid.
Oh boy, well, that jawboning, we will try to gauge that because of course they are holding that media conference after as well. So we'll hear from Michelle Bullock. Today though, Chinese stocks at least have risen on that strong activity data. It's the so-called data dump coming from China. So property investment declines are slowing, but there still are some pretty shaky parts of the market, and that's why I chose Fortescue as the stock of the day. We'll get there in just a little while. But yeah, we have seen a lot of pressure on the price of iron ore, and I was reading some analysis from Westpac this morning saying, look, they reckon it can take a few legs lower throughout this year.
Absolutely, and I just had a really good chat with Gary Ning from Natixis about all those numbers. So if you want to take a deeper dive into them, you can check them out there. And pretty much treading water today as we wait for those central banks. But let's have a look at some of the sectors because we did see a fefew positive moves, and I think we have, there we go, the REITs. I thought this was quite interesting, Nadine.
Really getting hit.
Yeah, but not surprising when you look at 10-year Treasury yields in the US moving up on Friday as a result of the PPI numbers. So Goodman Group, of course, that's been on a tear, and that was off by almost 4% today.
Yeah, that came up in the call today as well. Now that I think about it, we were analysing BWP Trust. And of course, Goodman, always referred to as one of those really quality companies in the A-REIT space. Look, here's a second page. You can see there, Lend-Lease. It is up by 1.2%. Elsewhere, though, it really was a split picture. So the financials were higher, up by about 0.4%. But, the miners, proving a pretty resilient, except for there you go, Fortescue, which was down by about a percentage point.
Yeah, absolutely. There was, I think, a little bit of a bounce on the China figures in the iron ore price. But quite a bit of news coming out today. So Mineral Resources is set to acquire the Lake Johnson nickel concentrator plant and tenure in Western Australia from Poseidon Nickel. And they've got a suite of payments that are going to be made. $1 million on the start, $6.5 million on completion, and $7.5 million after completion.
Yeah, they're going to make it into a lithium processing plant, apparently. So that is, value add here in Australia. I'm all in favor of that. We've got a chairman stepping down from Southern Cross Austereo, Rob Murray. It obviously is coming as we've got this proposed buyout bid on the table from ARN Media, so that's juicy. Also juicy, I've loved following this story. Aussie Broadband has been told by Superloop Superloop, if you recall last week, won the Origin contract away from Aussie Broadband. Well, guess what? Aussie Broadband owns 19.9% of Superloop. Today, Superloop said, guess what? You're not in compliance with our regulations in relation to a Singaporean holding. And so it has said you must sell. So Superloop's shares in focus, as well as Aussie Broadband. It was actually up by 1.4%. Anyways, it's quite the popcorn watching inducing story.
Absolutely. And South 32, which was strong today, has halted operations at its manganese mine on Groot Island after tropical cyclone Megan caused damage to the site. But despite the news, the shares were up about 5%.
Hey, Danny, you were just chatting with Digital X, right? It's a Bitcoin fund manager, and it's raised cash, 5.3 million.
Yeah, and that was scaled back, so huge demand there, and we had a really good conversation. In fact, the CEO threw it open, because I did say that Shane Oliver really put a hose down the sector last week, and she goes, well, I think it's time for a debate. So we had quite a big conversation about where the market is heading. So there's just a thought going forward, a debate for and against.
Shane, you listening?
Cryptos.
You up for it? Anyways, Lisa Wade is her name. We'll get that up online ASAP, so you can have a little listen back. It was a good interview. I had an ear to it as well, Danny. But let's get big picture, shall we? Welcome to the COB, Josh Gilbert from eToro. Josh, good Monday to you. What do you make of the market's performance here locally today?
It was a pretty lackluster session, I guess we could probably say. I think we've obviously got, as you sort of discussed there, an absolutely massive week across the board. So maybe a little bit of risk aversion coming into play a little bit. Not a lot of movement all in all. I guess that sort of China data was probably the real driver of sort of maybe most Asian markets today. I mean, that sort of retail sales number still sort of showing really that consumer demand remains probably what is the weak spot in the China recovery. Maybe a little bit of a bright spot coming from sort of the industrial numbers. We obviously had the stimulus package that came through at the latter end of 2023. So maybe we're starting to see some of those early signs of that working. But I think ultimately, we're going to get a cap on equities in sort of China, and especially on sort of our iron ore miners, because I just don't think we're sort of really getting what we want from China. I don't think that the stimulus is having the measures that we've expected. And we have been sort of talking about this China recovery for so long now, and it just sort of continues to feel that it's dragging on. So I think to sort of find any positivity for sort of iron ore miners at the moment is going to be pretty difficult for investors, I think.
Oh, Josh, yes, the recovery that just keeps on sort of spluttering. Now tell me, some people are saying the NVIDIA event, Jensen Huang speaking tonight for 2 hours, not tonight, tomorrow morning.
Are they calling it the Woodstock of AI?
Yeah, it's a huge thing. They're unveiling the new B100, I think, if I read it correctly. And this is going to be the market-moving event of the week. Forget the BOJ, forget the Fed, this is it. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think really it is, right? Because we have sort of the AI sort of focus at the moment is really what is capturing investors. It's what's sort of driven, markets this year. We know that if we look at the two best performing stocks on the S&P 500 this year, both AI related stocks. So again, this is going to be what I think investors look towards. Ultimately, we want to see what sort of progress we're getting on AI. What's the next step? What are NVIDIA going to tell us about what they're doing next? Because that big question has continued to come over the last couple of weeks. I think we spoke about it last week, but it's, how much further does NVIDIA have to run? How long are we going to sort of see this AI train sort of continue for? So if we keep getting these developments from NVIDIA, if we keep, hearing from them about, how high demand is, then, it's hard to sort of envisage that they are going to sort of slow down anytime soon. But again, I think it's also how we're going to see the broader market react as well, because we had earnings from Adobe last week that sort of disappointed a little bit, again, sort of related to sort of, an AI base there as well. We've also got names like Apple as well that, maybe starting to sort of come to the party a little bit. I think they had a couple of announcements over the last sort of 24 hours, but again, they've kept their cards close to their chest, and then they've really struggled this year, really underperforming sort of the broader market. So again, AI is that buzzword, and if you're using it in the right way, the business is going to do really well. But NVIDIA is that one that continues to be that investors turn to. So any updates from them this week will be really important.
Okay, what, big question, but what else are you watching this week? I mean, we know that we've got the central bank meetings, it's going to be all about when the rate cut will come. Is there anything else sort of corporate-wise in the United States? I can't help but feel that, we're in this lull between the quarterlies, but, come April, they're going to be upon us once again. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you've mentioned central banks, they sort of really take that focus, and we've seen a real change in sort of market pricing for cuts over the last week, US and RBA included as well, a big pushback there. Elsewhere, though, you mentioned in corporates, I'd have a look to some names. We've got FedEx, we've got Nike, we've also got Lululemon on the agenda this week as well. So 3 names there that I think is going to be a pretty good insight into the US economy, but also into sort of that US consumer as well. We've obviously, spoke a lot about, retailers locally, but also in the US, fairly resilient. Consumers have held up pretty well, but we're getting to that point now where, it's probably at the back end of rates, and that's really going to start to have the effect on the consumer, given how high they've been for as long as they've been now. Nike have obviously struggled, particularly in sort of China. We know that they've got a lot of headwinds there as well. They cut about 2% of staff last month. So I'd be looking there for any updates on cost saving, how those layoffs are going to sort of impact bottom lines moving forward. Nike and Lululemon, particularly, we're going to be looking at inventories. Is that going to be weighing on the business, ultimately as well? And then of course FedEx, are they delivering for these businesses, your Amazons and all those other companies? That's a great sign to see if people are still online and ordering as well. So again, I think there's 3 great earnings there to give us a good look into the US consumer.
Really good points. Just quickly on TikTok, because there's all this concern that if it is banned, the retaliation against companies like Apple, Tesla, potentially McDonald's, Starbucks, even the Nikes of the world, is this sort of a beat up story, or do you think there really are implications of Cold War blowback?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we're in that point now where sort of any type of unrest is sort of maybe going to have, a little bit of uncertainty on some of those sort of names, especially when we're sort of coming into a really important time of the year when we think about political events sort of coming through as well. We know that sort of, maybe China-US relations aren't, that they've never been the best. They maybe sort of improved recently. We've had chip wars. We've obviously, we know that, that there's obviously a lot resting on, obviously, as we say, that sort of US election as well, Trump, Biden, etc. So I definitely do think there's going to be some implication for these businesses, and dependent obviously on their exposure to China. It wouldn't surprise me to see investors take a little bit of risk off the table there, given that exposure. But I feel that is as if that we may see some resolution to sort of maybe this TikTok feud, but again, that's to sort of be seen. It is obviously a massive business, but also I think it has implications as well for sort of brands as well across the globe that are pretty well set up on that now. We know it's probably one of arguably the most used social platforms at the moment, especially with the younger generation as well. So I also do think it has an impact, from a business marketing side as well. But it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of months.
Oh my gosh, so much to think about. Really exciting times. Josh Gilbert, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, guys. Have a great week. Take care.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned that Putin, of course, won in Russia.
No, that's a surprise.
Unchallenged. I wonder why. And we've got Kim Jong-un. I mean, really crazy times, congratulating Putin on his win just recently in the Asian region. So iron ore did extend some falls, but we have seen that data in China, I guess, capping some of the earlier losses, and that was front of mind when we were discussing Fortescue on the call today with David Lane from Ord Minnett and Josh Barker from Macro Capital.
See from that share price that the market's been selling Fortescue down. Currently we're around 23.61, so they're down about 1.5% already today. We still think it's probably got further to fall, and that medium and longer term, the outlook for China is very negative, and that we think a sustained slowdown in China could well be the case. In which case, the iron ore price, similar to what Westpac's been saying today, could well go lower before it bottoms out.
We actually do prefer BHP, particularly around these levels for like an accumulate, if any, buy on any pullbacks potentially. As you've seen from the commodity price in iron ore, Fortescue does move a lot more to the upside and to the downside compared to BHP. And BHP has held up a lot over the last week, mainly because copper has increased in that meantime. So there's a lot of different movements happening with commodities right now. Our view would be to get exposed to it on pullbacks, in terms of the impact that the iron ore is having on the Australian, GDP and things like that. The Oz government's still pricing in a budget of about $80 a tonne, which it's never traded for 5 years. But if it does get anywhere near that, sort of 80s or 90s, we'll be looking to accumulate that, but doing it with that diversified exposure to those other commodities through a BHP. Okay. So, not delving into Fortescue just yet.
Okay, shall we go to the leaders and the laggards and see what has been happening today? And there we go, South 32 on the top of the boards, Iluka Resources almost up 5% as well. Interesting to see some of the uranium plays coming to life. Boss Energy up 4% and also Tabcorp. Yeah. They had a bad day on Friday.
Well, because the CEO had to step down because he had naughty language being used. And so, obviously rebounding from that. And then Life 360, this company really impressed in reporting season. It participated in our last virtual investor event actually last week. I spoke with Chris Hull, the CEO. He's just uber confident, that he'll be able to continue to put this company on the growth trajectory and profitable as well. And says, he's always had these levers to pull, so he's really confident on where it's headed. Now, laggards though, there is always that. And a bit of a motley crew here.
Yeah, so Core Lithium off by about 13.5%, and Weebit Nano, which we haven't seen in a while, almost off by 10%. Healius again in the firing line, off by about 6%, and Sayona Mining off by about 5%, and 4D Medical, also another one we haven't seen for a while, off by 4%.
In the small to mid cap space, we'll probably whip through these pretty quickly. We've got Race Oncology up. I'll check in to see what's been announced there. And on the flip side of this equation, some of the laggards, we've got Aura Energy, Neo Medicals, and there's Core Lithium down by about 14%. Tonight, Danny.
Yeah, so we've got the EU core CPI and the trade balance, but of course things are going to start to hot up in the US, and US Empire State Activity Index, the US Housing Market Sentiment, and the Housing Market Index, the NAHB. So probably all at some level, someone will find something interesting out of all of these indicators to add to the FOMC potential narrative on Wednesday their time, which will be Thursday morning our time.
Yeah, all right. So we will be keeping a very close eye on that. The CPI in Europe, by the way, that's for February. It's being finalized. It was last at 2.6% year on year.
Gosh,
but
that's
it's
low.
the RBA, it's the RBA tomorrow, isn't it? And so just to refresh your memory, we still do get this statement on the decision at 2:30. And we will be bringing you special programming from 2:30 to 3. And then we hear from Michelle Bullock at the newly minted media conference that happens afterwards. So we'll be there. We'll bring it to you. We'll be listening in. And in the mix, of course, BOJ. Will they move, Danny?
Absolutely. They did actually. The largest union gave the biggest wage increases in many, many years, in decades. So markets are currently expecting that the BOJ will raise rates for the first time in 17 years. It's hard to get your brain around that. But also we've got, that looks like New Hope earnings, as well as a few stocks going ex-dividend, the likes of Credit Corp, SEEK and AIA, which is Auckland International Airports.
Okay, so we are not expecting an interest rate move tomorrow here locally. Let's find out where this local market did close at today, though. Stick with what we know already rather than giving our views once again. It's just unreal just how much markets are hanging on these rate cut expectations coming through. 7,676 is the finish for the local market today. So managing to finish in positive territory.
Yeah, and the Aussie dollar, which is always a reasonable barometer of sentiment and what's going on, and it did pretty much nothing. It's pretty much flat today at around 65.61 US cents, so, or against the US dollar. So yeah, I think markets are just really treading water until we get the RBA or all these decisions coming out. Well, that's it, Nadine, isn't it?
I think we should call it. But if you've missed out on anything today, you had a great interview with Raymond Chan, just to name one.
Yep.
You know, lots of stock-specific information up on the website as well. Dean Fergie is another one that comes to mind. We really
Morningstar was great on the telcos.
Brian
Han was absolutely excellent. We really did a deep dive into the whole Optus thing and the structure of the industry. So a couple of buys in that sector.
Great. I think some of them might be in the COB newsletter. If you don't have it coming to your inbox, you should. You can find out how to do so on our website, ausbiz.com.au. Thanks for today. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.